Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Great Leadership. My guest today, a repeat guest, Steven Rogelberg, professor of organizational science, management, and psychology, and the founding director of organizational science at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte. He has over 100 publications addressing issues such as team effectiveness, leadership, engagement, health, employee well-being, and of course, meetings. And in fact, both Adam Grant and Dan Pink call him the world's leading expert on meetings. When Steven was a guest on this show, probably, I'm guessing 4 or 5 years ago, we were actually talking about his best-selling book at the time, which was called The Surprising Science of Meetings and How You Can Lead Your Team to Peak Performance. And now his new book, also about meetings, called Glad We Met. But this one is about the art and science of one-on-one meetings, which makes a lot of people very, very uncomfortable. I've certainly been in uncomfortable one-on-one meetings as well. So some of the things that we're going to be talking about today are, and we'll see how the conversation goes, but at least some of my notes here are around the impact of one-on-one meetings, how to have one-on-one meetings in the right way, how this can potentially foster connections and changes in organizational culture. We'll look at some of the challenges behind one-on-one meetings, some of the science behind one-on-one meetings, and the impact that they can have. And then towards the end, we're going to talk a little bit about how to structure an agenda for one-on-one meetings. And that's going to be for the VIP, the bonus subscribers that are going to get access to that episode. We'll also touch a little bit on AI and one-on-one meetings. I'm very curious to get your thoughts on that as well, Steven. So thank you for joining me again on the show.
Oh, you're welcome. It's so great to be here and to think about how much the world has changed since our last conversation. It's insane.
Yeah, I feel like I should go back and rewatch and re-listen to that episode just to see some of the things that we were talking about then versus what we're talking about now in this crazy new world that we're in.
Yeah.
So the new book, I love this angle, one-on-one meetings. At least from what I've seen, a lot of people struggle with this. I believe there was some research that was published, I think it was the Harvard Business Review a year or two ago. And they were talking about that one of the things that a lot of leaders struggle with the most is one-on-one meetings and communication, just because it's so uncomfortable. And again, I've been in those situations. I'm sure everybody watching and listening to this has been in those situations as well. What is it about one-on-one meetings that is so challenging or uncomfortable for so many people? Like, why do we not like them?
Well, I don't know if we don't like them. I think we don't like them when they're not done well.
Yeah.
In fact, the research shows that people do like them. In fact, they love them
Interesting.
when
Okay.
they're done well. And the people who like them the most tend to be your most senior managers, which I think is somewhat ironic. We often think about, the younger generation. Oh, our stereotype is they're feedback crazy. And so they're going to want lots of these one-on-ones, but more senior people desire them more because they know how critical these things, when done well, are to their success.
What's the difference between a one-on-one meeting that is done well versus a one-on-one meeting that is, a train wreck? Like if you could give two different scenarios,
Sure.
What would that comparison look like?
So let's take a step back and clarify exactly what a one-on-one meeting is. So a one-on-one meeting is a meeting that's facilitated and orchestrated by the manager, but it's for the direct. It's not for the manager. It's for the direct.
Okay.
It's the opportunity for the direct to be truly seen, the opportunity for the direct to get the information and support they need to be successful. But it's a predictable, reoccurring time where the leader can fully focus on what's on the minds of their directs. That definition now gives us great clues on how to answer your question. So the best ones do that, right? They're focused on the other person. They're asking well-rounded questions. The manager's truly listening, fully engaged, and embracing the agenda of the direct. They're also focused not only on driving the conversation, but also on the personal needs of the direct, the need to feel respected, heard, listened to. And the inverse, the bad one-on-one, you could imagine the manager is dominating the conversation. Not only are they talking the most, but it's their needs that are being met.
Yeah.
They are getting into the weeds, heavily micromanaging activities. And so the one-on-one just becomes a checklist of, did you do this? Did you do that? Did you do this? And that is not at all the intention of a one-on-one.
A lot of people think that a one-on-one meeting is similar to just a one-on-one conversation, right? Like if you talk to a friend or you talk to a coworker and it just happens to be the two of you there. But those are, again, very unstructured. They're casual. They don't have a set goal or an agenda. And so sometimes, and I've talked to people like this and they say, oh yeah, I have one-on-ones with my team all the time. We talk, we say hi, this and that. And then I'm thinking, that's not really kind of a one-on-one meeting. We're talking about something specific and structured and goal-oriented. So an example, could this be like a performance review? Could this be just a one-on-one check-in? You mentioned that they have to be scheduled and they're ongoing, right? It's not just kind of a one-off.
Yeah. No. So the essence of a one-on-one is this predictable time that you have with your manager to share what's on your mind.
Okay.
And there is a structure and an agenda of sorts. It's not like a heavy agenda like you could have with other meetings, but there's still a plan of action. The key is intentionality. So the one-on-one is your intentional effort to connect with your people. In so many ways, a one-on-one is where leadership truly happens. Think about it, right? When you're sitting down with your manager and that manager is fully dialed in to you and what's on your mind short-term as well as long-term in terms of career goals and such, it has a really different feel to it. It's like, right, when you go to a therapist, right, that session is not about the therapist. The therapist is facilitating, but it's about you. And it can be incredibly rewarding and helpful. Casual one-on-one conversations, that's more about both parties.
Yeah.
Right? That's more about the manager also having their needs met.
Yep.
And that's just not the spirit of it.
Not the same.
There's something so much more rich and ripe with potential when a one-on-one's intention is intentional.
So before we jump into kind of the structure of this stuff, what's the value of doing this in the right way? Right. Some people might be thinking, it's just a meeting. What's the point of all this? I just got to talk to my employees like a human being. This isn't that hard. What does the science say in terms of if you can have an effective one-on-one meeting that is done the right way, what is the outcome or the ROI, so to speak?
That's great question. And, when I was brainstorming titles for my book, there was an alternative title I was considering. And the alternative title is The One Meeting That Should Never Be an Email. And because I think that really reflects that these are not optional meetings.
Yeah.
These are absolutely essential. The science speaks loudly and clearly that these meetings are critical to the effectiveness of your directs.
Okay.
Their ability for them to prioritize work, their ability to align with other members of the team. There's a clear connection with one-on-ones and employee engagement. When you're having these one-on-ones on a regular cadence, these employees are much more engaged. And along with that, your top talent is less likely to leave.
Interesting.
And so from a direct report experience, this is how you maximize the potential of your team and prevent unwanted turnover. But we can change gears. Managers are inherently evaluated based on the success of those who report into them.
Yep.
And so the interesting thing about one-on-ones is we forget that when we do these right, it's only helping us. The better our team is, the better we are. The better our team is, the better others will see us as leaders. And there's data to support that. We have data that shows that when people are having good one-on-ones, team performance is better. So we have individual benefits for the direct, the manager benefits. This is also a critical activity for your diversity and inclusion efforts. In particular, this is where you can truly see this person.
Yeah.
And that is the essence of inclusion. And so another piece, which I think is worth mentioning, is so we're talking very meaningful kind of organizational outcomes, but another piece is these things actually make you happy, the leader. Namely, the research is really strong in that one of the best predictors of life satisfaction is helping others.
Wow.
Helping others. And one-on-ones are that fantastic vehicle for truly elevating and helping others. So the positive gains associated with good one-on-ones are so layered. And I'll throw one other thing that I think will resonate with you and your audience. We've all heard the adage, which is based on quite a bit of data, that people don't leave bad jobs, they lead bad bosses.
Yes.
And this is your opportunity to prove you're not a bad boss. This is where leadership truly happens intentionally.
Do you want to hear something really crazy? 96% of the people who watch videos on this channel are not subscribed. Help me change that number around by subscribing so that you can get access to more videos just like this one. And now let's get back to the content. So where do you begin? Yeah, right. People who are listening and watching this are saying, okay, got it. I need to have an effective one-on-one meeting. Where does that begin? And how do you think through that kind of a one-on-one meeting? Obviously, you get brought onto a lot of organizations to help them with that. So what are they asking you for? I mean, is it just kind of general where they call you up and they say, hey, Steven, we want to get better one-on-one meetings. Just come in here and do a workshop. Like what advice do you give these organizations that our viewers and listeners can apply to their own one-on-one meetings in their companies?
It really varies. I've been really very fortunate. I have organizations reach out pretty much weekly to have me talk to their leaders as well as their directs, because directs have a role in this too.
Okay.
And we can talk about that later. But the organizations have ranged from the really biggies, the Googles, the Amazons, the Facebooks, to government organizations, the UN. Basically, they're having me come in to talk about the potential of these activities and to try to shed light on exactly how to do them. People tend to recycle practices they themselves have experienced.
Yeah.
And we know based on the data that 50% of one-on-ones are rated as suboptimal.
50%, wow.
50%. So the practices being used and recycled are suboptimal practices.
Yeah.
So as a result, these one-on-ones are falling into the big category of another crappy meeting. And that's missing an amazing opportunity. And I think unlike meetings in general, people know in their hearts that a good one-on-one really can be transformative. We've all had them. We don't have a lot of them, but when we have them, they feel really amazing, right? The thought of someone truly taking an interest in us and our needs and where we need help is so incredibly powerful. So I think organizations, the crux of why organizations call me in is to unleash the full potential of these things and to stop them wallowing with just, in a sense, the trope of yet another meeting.
Yeah.
And so there's the philosophical contribution, and then there's the logistics. So exactly what does the science say? And from start to finish, how often should you have these? What kind of cadence? What are the best questions? How do you evaluate these things? How do you know if they're truly working? How do you facilitate them? What are the most common mistakes that managers make? And they're hungry for them, because one of the things that's really fascinating, Jacob, is I've done these interviews with hundreds of Fortune 100 companies, and I have only found one that has any training for their managers around one-on-ones.
Which company is that?
I can't talk about it. But so it's really striking that, organizations are spending time on this, and yet they're not doing anything to make them truly work.
Yeah.
And then when you combine that with two other factoids, one being that 50% are rated as suboptimally, but second, and this one is jarring, the research has consistently shown that managers are misaligned with their directs when it comes to evaluating the effectiveness of the one-on-ones they do. So managers think they're doing a good job. Directs, not so much.
Yeah.
So you have a blind spot, right? So you have this individual blind spot. And so you can just see this problem, right? You've got this recycling of practices. People know that they need to do this. They know, especially with a remote and distributed workforce, how critical it is to have these types of conversations. But they're not seeing the gains because they're just not acting consistently with the science.
So let's get into some of those questions that you were addressing as far as common mistakes, outcomes. What are some of the big questions that people are asking you for when it comes to the science of meetings? Is it starting off with what are the biggest mistakes that leaders make, or is it where to begin with having a good meeting, setting goals?
Yeah. So probably the most common is what are the biggest mistakes?
Okay.
And that often starts with cadence. How often should you be having these things? And the research speaks to this. We know that a weekly cadence or an every other week cadence yielded the most gains.
Okay.
By far. In fact, there was a really nice positive correlation. The more you have these things, the more engaged employees were.
But up to a point though, right? Like if you do, for example, multiple a week, I'm guessing that's a little much.
Then you've moved into a micromanaging activity.
Okay, got it.
Right. So yes, that is not recommended. If we have too many of these, you could just imagine the manager starts to their agenda.
Okay, so once a week or once every 2 weeks.
Perfect.
Okay.
But a very frequent cadence that we find is that people are doing a once a month. And the once a month just doesn't yield the same gains. With once a month, you're getting this tremendous recency bias, right? It's just, you're thinking about what happened last week.
Yeah.
Furthermore, you're not able to build any momentum or create continuity of threads. So it just doesn't get to where the potential can be. Now, if you gave me a choice, either a manager doing 0 or monthly, I'm like, okay, fine, do monthly.
Of course. But
it's just not nearly as helpful. So we want to have this as being a regular and predictable time. And interestingly, Jacob, this actually winds up saving the manager time. So managers often say, well, where am I going to find the time for this? And the fact is, you have to find the time for this. And you will actually gain time from it. And how you'll gain time is what's been reported is that when an employee knows they have this regular time with their manager, they actually stop as many impromptu interruptions, right? They save their issues for this one-on-one. So you're able to reclaim time that way. Second, when your employees are aligned and thriving, there's a lot of rework that is avoided. So this is truly a time investment that pays dividends. So cadence is one of the key mistakes.
But what if you have like 10, 15, 20 employees and you're doing one-on-ones with all of them, right? Some of the leaders out there might be thinking, I got too many employees. I don't have time to do one-on-ones with all of them. And are these, so we talked about the cadence, are these hour-long, 30-minute long? So how do you deal with having a lot of employees and how long should these meetings typically be?
First of all, if you have 15 or 20 employees,
too much.
You got a big problem. You need to fix that. That's not sustainable. That's not sustainable for you or the employees. That's a structural problem.
Okay.
But let's put that aside because there certainly are people that have that.
Yep.
But in general, okay, let's go to that extreme. Let's say you have these 10, 15 people. In those situations, there's still a few things you can do. You can move to the every other week model. You can make these meetings 20 minutes. And that is totally fine. If you have a weekly model, doing these for shorter amounts of time is fine because you have
Okay.
that continuity. If it's every other week, moving to 45 minutes works great as well. But I just can't emphasize enough that even if the time is just 15 minutes, because that's all you can manage given these competing demands, if it's truly intentional and predictable and you're bringing the direct fully into the conversation and not imposing your agenda, you're going to get value.
Okay.
There's going to be great value. So I have in the book a variety of tables and charts and flow charts where basically you can put in your situation and I'll provide, what the recommended cadence is in that situation. So whether you're new, your employees are new, whether you're, who's remote, all these considerations. And so, that's actually one of the neat things I think about the book, even different than my first book. My first book, really was getting at, the biggest challenges around meetings in general, but it wasn't laying out this formula for getting them done. This book lays out a process, but it's really a set of choices. And I think this is a really important thing for your listeners to realize is there's not a singular path to one-on-one success. There's lots of ways of achieving success. And so what I wanted to do in the book is present options. And that's why the book title also has art in it, the
Yep.
art and science, because we want to make sure this fits with your values and the values of your people. And so by giving you choices, you're able to kind of tweak it and make sure that this process connects. So throughout the book, I just provide a lot of, menus and tools and stuff to help you tailor it to your unique situation.
So besides cadence, I'm sure people are probably wondering, okay, what about the actual meeting itself?
Yeah.
Any tips or what are some of
Yes.
the biggest mistakes that people make when it comes to the actual meeting itself?
Love it. The biggest one is talking more than your direct. The direct needs to talk more than you.
Okay.
The greatest predictor we have of one-on-one ineffectiveness is the leader talking more than direct. And that goes to the heart of a one-on-one being for the direct, not the leader. So it's asking good questions, asking good probing questions, right? Tell me more, right? Help me understand, to truly understand what's on their minds. So it's giving the conversation to the direct, but this is not as easy as it seems because the research shows that talking a lot triggers the same parts of our brain as good food and sex. So we talk a lot because it feels good.
Yeah.
And we want to give that gift to our direct.
Okay.
So this disproportional ratio of talking is a key derailer in this. And then there's others. I mean, asking the wrong questions, not truly listening, not involving the direct in the solutioning enough. And that's an interesting one that we can explore. Not starting well, not ending well. So there's just so many different pieces of the puzzle just to be aware of.
Okay. And so the talking more, I think that makes a lot of sense. But let's say you're scheduling these one-on-ones with your employees. I mean, do you just go to your employees and say, hey, we're going to have this regular one-on-one and it's just going to be a time for, you know what I mean? Like I'm trying to figure out how to,
Yeah.
what the purpose of the one-on-one. Is
Yeah.
it, do you convey to your employees that this is a one-on-one where you just come to me and share your feedback and ideas? It's not a reviewing your performance every week. It's not a critique every week. It's not a what are you working on every week. It's specifically designed for the employee to share their thoughts, opinions, feelings, and what's going on with them while they're working with and for you. Is that kind of how you structure and position it?
Yeah, that's a nice summary statement. But it can be though other things too. It absolutely can be an opportunity to provide feedback
Okay.
to your direct. Because again, that delivered well helps them.
Yep.
Right. It absolutely could be the opportunity to say, tell me about the main things that you're working on and where are you finding challenges or problems and how can I help? So there is natural monitoring in it, but it's just we don't want to privilege that, and we
Yeah.
want to make sure it's being done with the employee driving it. We can monitor work in lots of different ways.
Yeah.
And so this is just a little different. So there's definitely feedback. There's definitely, check-ins, but it's just something more. And so much of the conversation is just dictated by what the employee is struggling with or wants to get better at or is thinking about long term. And when rolling this out to your people, there's this great opportunity to connect this to values.
Okay.
When I surveyed managers about the types of values they have as a manager, it's always, almost invariably what shows up there is helping others thrive, building team, right? These are all core values of so many managers.
Yep.
So if you're a manager and you go to your people and you say, listen, it is so important to me that you thrive. It's so important to me that you succeed and grow and be the best you can possibly be. And I want to help. I want to do my part in that journey. And one of the mechanisms that I want to do, that I want to introduce, is having these one-on-one meetings. And then the description that you shared, which I thought it was great. And then there's this emphasis of this is what the meeting is not about. And right. So the meeting is not about me just getting into the weeds and asking you how this task is doing, how this task is doing. It's not that. So address these issues and then roll it out as just a nice, affirmative and positive initiative that aligns with individual values and organizational values to help the individual and the team thrive. And people are energized by that. And one of the really, I think, an interesting finding is, we've asked employees, how often do you want these things? And they say almost without fail that they want them weekly or every other week. And then even those employees that are having them, we did some research. We said, well, would you want more or less of one of these one-on-ones with your manager? And what we thought was those employees who were incredibly busy, who were already, their calendars were filled with meetings, would say, yeah, I need less.
Yeah.
And we didn't see that. In fact, what we found was employees who wanted less of them, simply it was because managers were doing a crummy job with them. And then we saw the flip side. When employees saw their managers doing well with them, they just wanted more. And because the full potential was being realized by them, and they, really relished that time with their manager. So it's when it's framed as a strategic investment in helping others. And that's pretty exciting.
Yeah.
And it reflects really well on you.
Yeah, I like that angle as well. So kind of just making it clear that this is a meeting where I can help you. It's almost like a coaching and mentoring session.
Fabulous. Exactly. Yeah. And in fact, in the book, I introduce my science, but I absolutely bring in the science around mentoring, around coaching, because they all are really well connected.
If you enjoy getting leadership and career advice and trying to figure out how to future-proof your organization, you are not going to want to miss heading over and subscribing to my Substack, which you can do by going to greatleadership.substack.com. We have a community there of tens of thousands of people from around the world, and it's where I share my latest thinking, my best ideas, exclusive interviews with CEOs, in-depth articles and insights that I share, and leadership hacks from some of the world's top leaders and best-selling authors. So if you want to really step up your leadership game, excel in your career, head over to greatleadership.substack.com. You are not going to want to miss this opportunity. The danger there is you don't want people to feel like, oh, am I in trouble? Is this like a performance improvement plan where you're checking in on me every week? Exactly. So I think conveying that and letting people know that this is just kind of, I want to do more coaching and mentoring for you to help you is a good way to position it.
And when it's regular and predictable, you don't feel like you've been in trouble.
Yeah.
Right? So when it's just seen as this, it's just a natural extension of excellent leadership.
Yep.
And, and again, this is, I talk about this in the book, that this is this is actually not an optional activity.
Yeah.
Like you can frame it like, oh, make the case and why should I do this? It's not a choice.
Yeah.
It really isn't. You have to do it. If you are a leader, you have no choice. You have to engage with your people in meaningful ways. If
And
you're just driving performance without concern for the person, your top talent's going to leave.
Yeah.
Like they just will.
Yep.
And that's going to cost you more time.
What about in terms of doing this in person or virtual? I would imagine, for example, that having in-person meetings is far more effective. And I don't know if you have data or research or if any of this exists, but I would imagine that doing something like this in person, where you can see the other person, you can see their body language, you can kind of see them as a human being instead of just, a head floating on a screen, would be far more effective. And that as an employee, you should want this, because it's one thing to get coached virtually. And I actually put up an article a few weeks ago and a lot of people got very angry with me. And there's even an Instagram reel too, where I made the argument that working from home full time always is, you should want to be in the office. If you have aspirations to be a leader, an executive, a senior executive at a company, you should want to spend some time in an office, not necessarily 5 days a week, 9 to 5, but you should want your leaders to see you. You should want to engage and interact with your leaders. You focus on your executive presence, all those things. Do you find that for virtual versus in-person meetings, the in-person is more effective?
So we don't, the location and the modality has some effect, but it is so small in comparison to how that manager actually has the conversation. And so if you do it in person, you don't do a good job, versus doing it virtual and you do a good job, the virtual is going to be better.
Yeah.
And so the big boulder is the quality of the experience rather than the modality.
Okay.
With that said, you're correct. Our data does suggest that people prefer these slightly in person, not dramatically, by the way, but they want, even those who say that they're totally happy doing it virtual, they still want to have some in person. And I totally agree. And when we looked into some locations in person, the location, well, I'll let you take a guess. Which location
Coffee
do
shop?
you think? No, that's a good guess though. The location, do you want to go a second guess?
Okay, so not a coffee shop or co-working spot, maybe, in the corporate headquarters, like in a...
Yeah, the highest rated location was actually the manager's office.
Really? Like people want that?
Yeah. And then pretty much close to tied with that was the conference room. The least desired location was the direct's office.
Okay.
And then in interest in going to coffee shops and taking walks, it was more bimodal. So there were a lot of people who really liked it, like me. I would love that.
Yeah.
But there was an equal number who said, I'd rather not. I prefer a controlled setting. But this is not a problem, because the manager should ask their people, where would you like to have these? Because again, that emphasizes, that's a signal, right? That's a signal that this is a different type of a meeting, that this is a meeting for you. So I love that. I love a manager just saying, okay, where do you want to have these? What do you think is the best approaches to make sure that these things, truly work for you? And so we want to keep sending these signals.
I know in a couple of minutes, we're going to talk about how to structure the agenda. But before we jump into that, I thought it would be really interesting to talk about what is the first question you should start with and what is the last question you should ask to end the meeting. So how should you start it and how should you end it? And then we'll jump into the Leaders Toolkit section where we'll go through kind of how to structure a full agenda. So what do you begin with? Your employee sits down. Is it just kind of, hey, how are you? How's it going?
So first of all, that's a great question, by the way. I love that question. So the first question is a how are you?
Okay.
But there's a twist to it. The how are you question does not work.
Okay.
When you ask someone, how are you?
We get good.
Yeah, good, fine. Great. Just the best, right? Yeah. You hear all these automatic
I'm
responses.
good. How are you? I talk about that in my book as well. I call it the land of the goods, where,
Perfect.
because it's not a genuine question. Nobody's going to give you an honest response when you say that. It's how are
Right.
you is the equivalent of hi, and you get a hi back,
Exactly.
and there's no meaning to it.
Completely agree. So here's the twist that the research, and I share some, I unpack this a lot in the book. Um, if you ask someone, how are you? The twist is, so Jacob, I'd love to know how you are. So thinking about everything that's going on with you at work or outside work, if you'd like, how are you doing? But answer on a 10-point scale, with one being horrible and 10 being terrific.
Mm,
How are you?
okay.
How are you? And then what you will get are sixes, sevens, fives, and now you have something to work with. Right
Mm,
now it's, oh, tell me more. What's going on? What's keeping you from being a 10 or a 9? Right? So that question, it sets the tone for a really genuine conversation.
I like that.
All right. All right. So there's your first.
All right. And how do you end? So
All right.
your 20 minutes, 30 minutes are up. Is it just, well, I'm glad we talked. Thanks for coming. I'll see you next week. Kind of like when you end a therapy session, they're like, well, our time is up, and we'll see you next week at the same time.
How you end is there's an exchange of what was decided on. So the end is, all right. So here are the things that you asked me to do, and here are the things that you were going to work on. Are we aligned on that? And then there is actually writing them down. Note taking in one-on-ones truly matters.
Okay.
And what we've actually found in the research, that old school note taking with a
Pen and
pen
paper, yeah.
is yielded the most positive
Yeah, you don't
results.
want somebody typing on their phone or on a
Yeah,
laptop because, yeah, as soon as a
that's right.
screen is involved, I feel like it kills some of
Right.
the connection there.
So the final question in these one-on-ones is, all right, let's do a recap on what we decided, some next steps, and what we need to talk about next one-on-one. Now you've got a nice sandwich.
Okay, I love that. And it's funny because these are very simple and practical things that I think a lot of people forget. I feel like a lot of times when we go into meetings, we just kind of wing it. Like we have our one-on-one time scheduled, and it's like, well, sit down. Well, hey, how's it going? It's sort of like a podcast interview, right? You kind of just see where the conversation goes, but there's not a lot of intention and plan. And did I meet the goals? How's the other
Right.
person feel? Like we don't think through that a lot, which I think is a big mistake.
But actually connecting to podcasts, that's the difference between the good podcasts and the bad ones. So take you, for example. You do a good podcast. You are intentional. You did think about this. You reviewed where you wanted to go with this, and you asked me, what do you think of that? Any ideas for making it better? So you actually engaged in the behaviors, this intentional behaviors that make your podcast successful. And it's very similar to what makes a one-on-one successful. So while you provided parameters, you did not control the conversation.
Yeah.
You still allowed me to shape it. So kudos to you. That's exactly what we want to get out of this.
Well, I did get an advanced copy of your book, so I did cheat a little bit. I had a chance to read through some of that, but I appreciate any all those compliments. All right, so let's jump into the Leaders Toolkit section. And really, in this portion, I wanted to go through in detail how do you set an agenda for the meeting. And the way that I think about it is, I jotted down a couple points here. You let me know if anything's missing. First is picking the topic and the key objectives. I also jotted down how to balance flexibility with structure, like how much time during the meeting is not structured, where it's just talking. How you incorporate feedback, right? Because the other person needs to incorporate feedback. You need to incorporate feedback as a leader. You mentioned that the employee actually has a role that they play. How to adjust your agenda in the future depending on what's going on. And then I also jotted down kind of pre-meeting preparation and post-meeting kind of recap, like what you as a leader do. So maybe we could start with picking the topic and the objectives. So if I know that I'm meeting with an employee Tuesday at 10 a.m. and it's 9 a.m. now. How do I, as a leader, start preparing for that meeting? Do I, like a therapist, review my notes from the previous week? Do I take 20 minutes to just kind of think through that employee? Like, how do you prepare for that meeting and identify what you want to go over? Or can you just show up? All right, everybody, the rest of this episode is only available for subscribers of Great Leadership Plus on Apple Podcasts. And in this bonus episode, we're actually going to get into detail in terms of how to structure an agenda for your one-on-one meeting. We're going to be talking about how to pick the topic and key objectives. We'll look at how to balance flexibility with structure. We're going to look at post and pre-meeting preparation. And we're also going to be taking a look at how to adjust the agenda if needed. So if you want to get access to that episode so that you can create amazing one-on-one meetings for your team, then you can subscribe on Apple Podcasts. That's Great Leadership Plus. And if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with somebody who you would like to see become a better leader. I really appreciate it. It helps me bring in more amazing guests, just like Steven. You can also follow the show on Apple Podcasts, on Spotify as well. And lastly, if you want to become a better leader and get access to some of my best content and latest thinking, including guest posts from some people like Steven, head over to greatleadership.substack.com. It's where I'm putting up all of this exclusive content that I'm sharing. And my brand new book, Leading with Vulnerability, is also out. Head over to leadwithvulnerability.com if you're interested in grabbing a copy. Thanks again for tuning in. I will see you next week.